The massive alien ship hung in space like a silver moon. Its surface was so smooth and perfect that it seemed to glow with its own light. Ambassador Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the small window of the human shuttle as they approached. She had never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. First contact protocol is simple, Dr. Sarah Chen said from the seat beside her. The scientist held a small metal case on her lap. Inside were dozens of tiny containers, each holding seeds from Earth. We show respect, we share our culture, and we learn about theirs. Elena nodded, but her stomach was tight with worry. The Zephyrian Empire controlled half the galaxy. Their technology was so advanced that humans could barely understand it. These aliens could destroy Earth with a thought, or they could become humanity's greatest allies. Everything depended on the next few hours. The shuttle docked with a soft click. The airlock opened, and Elena stepped into a world that looked like it was made of crystal and light. The walls seemed to pulse with energy. The air smelled like flowers, but not any flowers from Earth. Everything was clean and perfect, like a hospital designed by angels. 3 Zephyrians waited for them. They were tall and thin, with skin that changed color like oil on water. Their leader wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. When he spoke, his voice came from a device around his neck, translating his words into perfect English. "I am Prime Cultivator Thexmar," he said. His tone was polite, but Elena heard something else underneath. Pride, maybe even arrogance. "Welcome to our ship. We are curious about your species." Elena stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Thank you for meeting with us, Prime Cultivator. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing Earth and humanity. With me is Dr. Sarah Chen, our leading expert on plant life." Thexmar's large eyes studied them for a moment. "Plants, how primitive, but please show us what you have brought." Dr. Chen opened her case carefully. Inside, neat rows of small containers held seeds of every color and size. She had spent months choosing which ones to bring: wheat for feeding people, roses for beauty, oak trees for strength, and in one corner, a small brown seed that looked like nothing special. "These represent the diversity of life on our world," Dr. Chen explained. "Each one has adapted to survive in different conditions. Some grow in deserts, others in frozen lands. Some can live underwater." The other 2 Zephyrians moved closer. One of them held a device that looked like a crystal wand. Blue light danced over the seeds as it scanned them. "Interesting," the scanner operator said, "but very basic. These plants have no artificial improvements, no genetic modifications. They are completely natural." "That's correct," Dr. Chen said proudly. "Our plants have evolved over millions of years to survive and thrive." Thexmar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Evolved? You mean they just grew randomly with no guidance or planning?" "Evolution isn't random," Elena said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's a process where only the strongest and most adaptable survive." "How wasteful," said the 3rd Zephyrian. This one wore symbols that marked her as a scientist. "On our worlds, every plant serves a purpose. We design them to be perfect for their role. No waste, no competition, no chaos." Dr. Chen picked up the small brown seed from the corner of the case. "This one is called kudzu. It grows very fast and can survive almost anywhere. On Earth, we have to be careful with it because it spreads so quickly." The scanner beeped as it examined the kudzu seed. "Very primitive," the operator announced. "Simple cellular structure, basic photosynthesis, no defensive mechanisms, no useful properties. But it's incredibly hardy," Dr. Chen tried to explain. "It can grow in poor soil, survive droughts, and adapt to new environments faster than almost any other plant we know." Thexmar waved his hand dismissively. "On our worlds, we would never allow such an uncontrolled organism to exist. Our bioengineers create plants that are beautiful, efficient, and perfectly controlled. They grow exactly where we want them, exactly how we want them." The Prime Cultivator gestured to a wall that suddenly became transparent. Beyond it, Elena could see part of their home world in the distance. Even from space, she could see that it was covered in perfect geometric patterns of green and gold. Gardens laid out with mathematical precision, not a single plant out of place. "Behold Nexus Prime," Thexmar said with obvious pride. "Every growing thing on that world serves a purpose. Every tree, every flower, every blade of grass has been designed by our greatest minds. There is no waste, no ugliness, no chaos." Dr. Chen stared at the perfect world. "But what about adaptation? What happens if conditions change? If there's a disease or climate shift?" "Impossible," the scientist said firmly. We control everything. Weather, soil composition, atmospheric content. Nothing changes unless we will it to change. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. These aliens had created a perfect world, but it was a world without wildness, without the messy unpredictability that made life strong. We would be honored if you would accept these seeds as a gift, she said carefully. Perhaps they could be studied or displayed in your museums. Thexmar considered this. Very well. They will make interesting exhibits. Our people will find it amusing to see how primitive species develop without proper guidance. He gestured to one of his assistants. Have these placed in the Imperial Botanical Museum. The Natural History section. Dr. Chen handed over the case, but she looked worried. Please be careful with the kudzu. It really does grow very fast if given the right conditions. Do not concern yourself, the scientist said with what Elena was beginning to recognize as typical Zephyrian arrogance. Our containment systems are perfect. Nothing grows on our worlds without our permission. As they prepared to leave, Thexmar made one final comment that would haunt Elena for months to come. Your species shows promise, he said. With proper guidance, you might someday learn to control your world as we control ours. But first, you must abandon these chaotic, uncontrolled systems you seem so proud of. The shuttle ride back to the human ship was quiet. Dr. Chen stared out the window at the perfect alien world growing, smaller behind them. Did we do the right thing? Elena asked. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. I tried to warn them, she finally said. But they wouldn't listen. They think their control makes them stronger, but they don't understand. The things that make plants strong on Earth aren't control and perfection. They're competition and survival and the ability to adapt to anything. You think the seeds might cause problems? I think, Dr. Chen said slowly, that they're about to learn why we call kudzu the vine that ate the South. But Elena didn't understand what she meant. Not yet, none of the humans did. They had given the Zephyrians a gift that they thought was harmless. A simple plant from a chaotic world. They had no idea they had just handed the most advanced civilization in the galaxy the key to its own destruction. Curator Velthara walked through the Imperial Botanical Museum with the pride of someone who had spent her entire life perfecting something beautiful. The morning light streamed through the crystal dome overhead, casting rainbow patterns on the polished floors. Every plant in the vast space had been chosen and placed with care. Every leaf was exactly the right shade of green. Every flower bloomed at precisely the right time. The museum sat in the heart of Nexus Prime's capital city, surrounded by the famous perfected gardens. From her office window, Velthara could see the mathematical precision of the landscape. Spiral pathways wound between trees that had been grown to exact specifications. Flowers bloomed in perfect color gradients. Even the grass grew to uniform height, maintained by tiny biomechanical workers that moved through the gardens like living jewels. 6 months had passed since the strange human delegation had visited. Velthara still remembered the day the seed containers had arrived at her museum. The accompanying notes from Prime Cultivator Thexmar had been dismissive, almost mocking. Primitive specimens from the chaos world, he had written. Display them as examples of uncontrolled biological development. Velthara had been curious despite the Prime Cultivator's attitude. The humans had seemed so proud of their chaotic plants. She had read their research files with growing amazement. These earth plants actually competed with each other. They fought for resources. They developed poisons and thorns and aggressive growth patterns just to survive. It was fascinating and horrible at the same time. She had set up a special exhibit in the Natural History Wing. The biodome was small but perfectly controlled, just like everything else on Nexus Prime. Temperature, humidity, soil composition, light levels. Everything was monitored and adjusted to optimal levels. Most of the human seeds had done reasonably well. The roses had bloomed with simple, primitive beauty. The wheat had grown in orderly rows. The oak seedling was tiny but healthy. Visitors came by daily to stare at these examples of natural plant life. Many laughed at how random and chaotic they looked compared to Zephyrian plants, but the kudzu had been different from the start. Velthara checked her daily reports as she walked toward the biodome. The kudzu had struggled for the first month. The soil engineered for Zephyrian plants didn't have the right nutrients. The pH was wrong. The beneficial bacteria that Earth plants needed simply didn't exist. She had almost given up on it when she remembered the small vial the human scientist had given them. Earth soil microbes, Dr. Chen had said, just in case the plants need help adapting. At the time, Velthara had thought it was silly. Zephyrian soil was far superior to anything that could come from a chaotic world. But when the kudzu began to wither, she had decided to try the human microbes. Within days, the change was remarkable. The small vine perked up, its leaves turning a deeper green. It began to grow. Now, months later, it was growing very well indeed. Velthara entered the biodome and immediately noticed something different. The kudzu had been planted in a small corner plot, given minimal space because it was supposed to be just a display specimen, but the vine had grown larger than she expected. Much larger. The main stem was as thick as her arm now, and smaller vines spread out in all directions. They climbed the support posts and spread across the ground. Some had even reached the walls of the biodome, their tendrils exploring the smooth surface looking for something to climb. Fascinating, she murmured, making notes on her datapad. The growth rate was far beyond what the human files had suggested. But then again, the humans probably didn't know how to provide optimal growing conditions. Her assistant, Mordek, appeared at her elbow. He was young and eager, always trying to impress her with his observations. "Curator, the kudzu specimen has shown unusual root development," he said, consulting his own notes. "The root system is much more extensive than predicted. It's reached the drainage systems at the bottom of the dome." Velthara nodded approvingly. "Excellent adaptation. The plant is making efficient use of the space we've provided. Should we trim it back? Some of the other specimens are being overshadowed." Velthara considered this. It was true that the kudzu was starting to crowd the other earth plants. Its vines were beginning to climb over the wheat and reach toward the roses. But it was such a perfect example of chaotic growth patterns. Museum visitors loved to see how uncontrolled the earth plants were compared to their own perfectly managed specimens. "Let it grow," she decided. "It's an excellent educational display. Our people need to see how primitive plants behave when left to their own devices." What Velthara didn't know was that the biodome's foundations extended deep into the ground, connecting to the city's root systems. Nexus Prime was built like a living thing, with networks of channels that carried water, nutrients, and energy throughout the urban landscape. The biodome was connected to this network, designed to share resources with the surrounding gardens. Deep underground, so small that the monitoring systems couldn't detect it, a tiny crack had formed in the biodome's foundation. The building's supports expanded and contracted slightly with temperature changes, and over time, this had created a gap no wider than a strand of hair. The kudzu's roots had found this crack. In the earth soil, among the native microbes that Dr. Chen had provided, were organisms that could break down almost anything organic. They worked slowly on the biodome's biosynthetic materials, making the tiny crack just a little bit wider. Not enough to trigger any alarms. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for a single root hair to push through. On the other side of that crack was paradise. The perfected garden soil was rich beyond anything the kudzu had ever experienced. It was full of nutrients, perfectly balanced with no competing plants to fight for resources. The Zephyrian plants that grew there had been designed for beauty and efficiency, not for competition. They had no natural defenses because they had never needed any. The kudzu root that squeezed through the crack found itself in a world without predators, without competition, without anything to stop it from growing. Above ground, Velthara continued her daily inspections, pleased with how well the exhibit was performing. Visitors came by constantly to marvel at the chaotic earth plants. Children pressed their faces against the biodome's walls, amazed by how random and wild the kudzu looked. "Look how it just grows wherever it wants," one young Zephyrian exclaimed to her parent. "It doesn't stay in neat rows like our plants." The parent nodded with the superior smile of someone from an advanced civilization. "That's what happens when there's no intelligence guiding growth, little one. Chaos and waste." If they had looked more carefully at the ground around the biodome, they might have noticed a few small green shoots appearing among the perfectly manicured grass. But the shoots were tiny, easy to mistake for weeds that the maintenance systems would clean up. The maintenance systems tried, but the tiny shoots kept coming back, growing faster than anything in the Zephyrian gardening databases. The automated systems weren't programmed to deal with anything this aggressive. 3 weeks later, Velthara received her first worried report from the head groundskeeper of the perfected gardens. "Curator," the message read, We're seeing some unusual plant growth around the museum. Nothing serious yet, but it doesn't match any of our registered species. Could something have escaped from your exhibits? Belthera read the message with amusement. Escaped? From her perfectly contained biodome? The idea was ridiculous. The containment systems were flawless. Nothing could escape without triggering dozens of alarms. She sent back a polite message explaining that such a thing was impossible. All specimens were accounted for and properly contained. But that night, she had the first of many dreams about green vines spreading across the perfect crystalline spires of her city. In the dream, she tried to cut them back, but they grew faster than she could work. They covered everything in sight, turning the mathematical precision of Nexus Prime into a wild, chaotic jungle. She woke up laughing at her own imagination. It was just a plant, after all. What harm could one small vine possibly do? The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the kudzu had been planted. Groundskeeper Zalthon was doing his routine inspection of the perfected gardens when he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. A section of the prize-winning crystal roses had been overgrown by something green and wild. Zalthon had worked in the gardens for 40 years. He knew every plant, every flower, every blade of grass. He could tell you the genetic sequence of each specimen and exactly when it would bloom. The gardens were his life's work, a masterpiece of biological engineering that drew visitors from across the galaxy. But this green thing didn't belong in any database. The vine had thick, fast-growing stems covered in large 3-lobed leaves. It climbed over everything in its path, wrapping around the delicate crystal roses like a strangling hand. Where it touched the roses, they seemed to weaken and wilt. Not from disease, but from simple competition for light and space, something no Zephyrian plant had ever experienced. Zalthon activated his communicator with shaking hands. "Emergency in Sector 7, he reported. "Unknown plant species detected. It's covering the crystal roses." The response came from the head of garden security. "Unknown species? That's impossible. Run a genetic scan." Zalthon pointed his scanner at the invasive vine. The device hummed for several seconds, then displayed a message that made his blood run cold. "Species not found in database. Origin unknown." Within an hour, a team of experts had gathered around the affected area. Curator Velthara stood at the edge of the group, her face pale with growing realization. The vine looked familiar, very familiar. "It's the kudzu," she whispered. Chief Biologist Nexara turned to stare at her. "That's impossible. Your specimens are contained. I've seen the security reports myself. Then how do you explain this?" Velthara asked, pointing at the rapidly spreading vine. By the time they finished arguing, the kudzu had visibly grown another few centimeters. It was spreading faster than anything they had ever seen. The Zephyrian plants, bred for slow, controlled growth, couldn't compete with something that could grow several feet in a single day. "We need to contain this immediately," Nexara declared. "Cut it back to its source and destroy every trace." Teams of workers descended on the affected area with precision cutting tools. They worked quickly and efficiently, just as they had been trained to do. Within hours, they had removed every visible trace of the kudzu from the crystal rose garden. "Problem solved," Nexara announced with satisfaction. But the problem was far from solved. The kudzu they had removed was just the visible part. Underground, the root system had been spreading for weeks. It followed the nutrient channels that connected different sections of the garden. It grew along water pipes and through drainage systems. It found every crack, every gap, every weakness in the perfectly designed infrastructure. 2 days later, the kudzu erupted in 6 different locations across the capital city. This time it wasn't just climbing over other plants, it was climbing buildings. The Zephyrian architecture was designed for beauty, not defense. The crystal spires and flowing organic shapes that made Nexus Prime famous also provided perfect surfaces for a climbing vine. The kudzu wrapped around support columns and spread across decorative facades. It found purchase on surfaces that the architects had never imagined anything could climb. Panic began to spread through the government offices. Prime cultivator Thexmar called an emergency meeting of the High Council. "How is this possible?" he demanded, staring at holographic displays showing the spreading green invasion. "Our containment systems are perfect." Velthara stood before the council, her career in ruins but her scientific curiosity still burning. "I've been studying the plant since it appeared in the gardens," she reported. "It's not behaving like any Zephyrian species. It doesn't follow normal growth patterns. It doesn't respond to environmental controls. It seems to actively seek out new territory to colonize. Then we'll destroy it with bioweapons," declared Military Commander Zendok. "We have precision pathogens that can target specific genetic markers." "I've tried that," Velthara said quietly. "The chemical agents we use to control unwanted growth have no effect on the kudzu. If anything, they seem to make it grow faster." This statement caused an uproar in the council chamber. For thousands of years, the Zephyrians had maintained perfect control over their biological environment. The idea that a simple plant could resist their technology was unthinkable. "What about physical removal?" suggested another council member. "We've tried. For every section we cut down, 2 more appear somewhere else. The root system is vast and growing constantly. Our teams can't keep up with it." The truth was even worse than Velthara was willing to admit in public. The kudzu wasn't just resisting their control efforts, it was learning from them. Each time they tried a new approach, the plant seemed to develop resistance. It was evolving in real time, adapting to every challenge they threw at it. The earth microbes that Dr. Chen had provided weren't just helping the kudzu grow. They were accelerating its evolution, providing genetic material from countless other earth organisms that had survived billions of years of competition and environmental pressure. Meanwhile, outside the council chambers, the situation was getting worse by the hour. The kudzu had reached the city's main transportation hub. It was growing over the magnetic levitation tracks, disrupting the flow of people and goods. Vines had infiltrated the atmospheric processing stations, forcing technicians to work around growths that seemed to appear overnight. Worse, the plant was beginning to affect the city's technology. The Zephyrian systems were bio-integrated, using living components that interfaced with mechanical ones. The kudzu seemed able to interact with these systems in ways that no one understood. Power grids flickered as vines grew through control nodes. Communication networks developed strange delays as the plant's root systems interfered with data transmission. "It's not just growing randomly," Velthara explained to her assistant as they watched the latest reports. "It's targeting infrastructure. It's going after the systems that keep the city running." Mordek looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "How can a plant be that intelligent?" "It's not intelligent," Velthara said slowly. "It's evolved. On Earth, plants that could find and exploit weaknesses in their environment survived. Plants that couldn't died. After millions of years of that pressure, the survivors became incredibly good at finding resources and avoiding threats. The final straw came when the kudzu reached the palace of the prime cultivator himself. The massive structure was the crown jewel of Zephyrian architecture, a living building that grew and changed according to the needs of its inhabitants. The walls were made of specially engineered plant matter that could adjust their transparency, temperature, and even shape. The kudzu found these walls irresistible. Within hours, the entire palace was covered in a thick carpet of green. The building's bio-responsive systems, designed to work with cooperative Zephyrian organisms, couldn't cope with an aggressive invader. They tried to adapt to the kudzu's presence, but the vine's rapid growth overwhelmed their processing capacity. The palace began to malfunction. Walls became opaque when they should have been clear. Rooms changed temperature randomly. Some sections of the building began growing in directions that defied both gravity and architectural sense. Prime cultivator Thexamar was forced to evacuate his own home. As he stood in the gardens that surrounded the palace, watching green vines consume the greatest achievement of his civilization, Thexamar finally understood what the human scientist had tried to tell him. "The vine that ate the South," he whispered, remembering Dr. Chen's words. For the first time in his long life, the most powerful being on Nexus Prime felt helpless. All their technology, all their control, all their perfection meant nothing against a simple plant that had learned to survive in the chaos of an uncontrolled world. The kudzu wasn't just growing anymore. It was conquering. 6 months after the first escape, Nexus Prime was no longer recognizable as the jewel of the Zephyrian Empire. General Kexthun stood on the observation deck of the orbital defense station, staring down at what had once been the most beautiful world in the galaxy. The perfect geometric patterns of the perfected gardens were gone, buried under an endless sea of green. The crystal spires of the capital city still poked through the vegetation in places, but they looked like the bones of some ancient creature being slowly digested by a massive organism. "Status report," he demanded from his aide. Lieutenant Morvex consulted his datapad with trembling hands. "Kudzu coverage has reached 87% of the planetary surface. All major cities are compromised. Population centers have been reduced to underground installations only. What about the bioweapon strikes?" "Complete failure, sir. The pathogens we deployed either had no effect or seemed to make the growth stronger. Dr. Velthara believes the plant is somehow incorporating the genetic material from our weapons and using it to improve itself." Kexus. Thune closed his 4 eyes in frustration. How had it come to this? The Zephyrian Empire had conquered half the galaxy through superior technology and perfect biological control. They had remade dozens of worlds, turning chaotic natural environments into orderly paradises. Now they were being defeated by a single species of plant from a primitive world. "What about the orbital bombardment?" he asked. Morvex hesitated. "The strikes destroyed the surface growth in the targeted areas, but the root systems survived. Within days, new growth emerged from underground. If anything, the bombardment seemed to stimulate faster spreading to adjacent areas." The truth was even worse than the lieutenant was willing to say. The orbital strikes had revealed something terrifying about the Kudzu's evolution. Where the bombs had hit, the new growth was different, stronger. It had thick, almost armor-like bark that could resist further attacks. The plant was learning from every assault. Down on the planet's surface, Curator Velthara had become the reluctant expert on humanity's gift to the galaxy. She worked from a sealed research station buried deep underground, one of the few facilities that the Kudzu hadn't yet penetrated. Her latest report made for grim reading. "The organism has evolved far beyond its Earth origins," she wrote. "It has incorporated genetic material from dozens of Zephyrian plant species, gaining new capabilities with each integration. Current observations include rapid adaptation to local soil conditions. The Kudzu can now thrive in environments that would kill the original Earth species. Enhanced climbing ability. The vines can now scale perfectly smooth surfaces and seem to actively seek out structural weaknesses in buildings. Bio-integration capabilities. The plant has learned to interface with our biotechnology, sometimes controlling it for its own purposes. Accelerated reproduction. Seed production has increased by 400% since initial observations. Wind dispersal is spreading the organism to previously unaffected continents. Most concerning, apparent learning behavior. The organism remembers and adapts to control measures faster than we can develop new ones. Above ground, the reality was even more terrifying than the reports suggested. The Kudzu had become something that no longer resembled any earth plant. In some areas, the vines had grown together to form massive structures that rose hundreds of meters into the air. These green towers pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed almost like communication networks. The plant had consumed entire forests of Zephyrian trees, absorbing their genetic modifications and incorporating their abilities. There were now sections of Kudzu that could photosynthesize using infrared light, allowing it to grow in complete darkness. Other areas had developed the ability to process atmospheric gases, gradually changing the planet's air composition. Most frightening of all, the Kudzu had begun to show signs of collective intelligence. Dr. Nexara, the former chief biologist, had been studying this phenomenon from a research post near the northern polar region, one of the last areas still free from complete Kudzu domination. "It's not random anymore," he reported to the emergency council that now met in orbit. "The growth patterns show coordination. When we attack one area, other areas seem to respond as if they know what's happening. It's like the entire planet has become a single organism." Prime Cultivator. Thexmar listened to these reports with growing despair. He had been forced to establish a government in exile, ruling the Zephyrian Empire from a fleet of ships orbiting their lost homeworld. "What about evacuation?" he asked. "Impossible on any meaningful scale," reported the logistics coordinator. "We have maybe 10 million people left in the underground cities. Our transport capacity would take decades to evacuate them all. And the Kudzu is finding ways into the underground systems. We're losing more facilities every day." The evacuation attempts had revealed another horrible truth. The Kudzu had learned to recognize and target Zephyrian technology. Whenever transport ships tried to land, the plant would surge toward the landing sites trying to climb aboard the vessels. Several ships had been lost when kudzu vines managed to penetrate their hulls and interfere with critical systems. Then we need to find a way to destroy it completely, Thexmar declared. What about atmospheric manipulation? Can we change the planet's environment to something the plant can't survive? Dr. Velthara's response came from the underground research station. We've tried altering temperature, humidity, atmospheric composition, even radiation levels. The kudzu adapts faster than we can implement changes. It's like fighting an enemy that becomes immune to every weapon as soon as you use it. The most desperate proposal came from military commander Zendok. What if we sterilize the entire planet? Use fusion bombs to turn the surface into glass? The council chamber fell silent. They were talking about destroying their own homeworld, the center of their civilization, the most beautiful planet in the galaxy. Even that might not work, Velthara said quietly. The root systems extend deep underground. Some have reached the planet's core thermal vents. The kudzu is drawing energy directly from the planet's interior. It might survive even total surface destruction. Thexmar stared out at the green world below. Somewhere in that mass of vegetation were the ruins of his palace, his gardens, his perfect civilization. Everything his people had built over thousands of years was being consumed by a plant that had once fit in a container, small enough to hold in one hand. How long? He asked. How long until what, Prime Cultivator? Until there's nothing left. Until it consumes everything. The science team had been working on projections for weeks. Dr. Nexara delivered the answer. At current growth rates, complete planetary coverage within 8 months. After that, he paused, studying his calculations. The biomass will be so large that it will begin affecting the planet's orbit. The additional mass could destabilize the entire solar system. And beyond that, the organism has already begun producing space-capable spores. Large ones designed for interplanetary travel. If they reach other-world Nexara didn't need to finish the sentence. Thexmar realized with growing horror that they weren't just facing the loss of their homeworld. They were looking at the potential consumption of their entire empire. Every perfect garden, every engineered paradise, every world they had spent millennia perfecting could fall to this unstoppable green tide. For the first time since the crisis began, he thought about the humans who had given them this gift. They had tried to warn him. Dr. Chen had specifically mentioned that the plant was dangerous, that it spread quickly, that it needed to be controlled. He had dismissed her warnings as the babbling of a primitive species that didn't understand proper biological management now. He understood that the humans hadn't given them a gift at all. They had handed the galaxy's most advanced civilization a weapon of mass destruction. And they had tried to warn him about it. The question was, had they done it on purpose? Thexmar activated his communications array and sent a message across the galaxy. It was a message he never thought he would have to send. A message asking for help from the primitive species that had somehow created the most dangerous organism in the known universe. 2 years after the first planting, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the same conference room where she had first met the Zephyrians. But everything had changed. The walls that had once pulsed with elegant energy now flickered with emergency lighting. The perfect crystal surfaces were cracked and stained. The air that had smelled like exotic flowers now carried the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere from a ship pushed beyond its limits. Across from her sat Prime Cultivator Thexmar, but he was not the proud, arrogant leader she remembered. His color-shifting skin had turned a dull gray. His elegant robes were replaced by the practical clothing of a refugee. Most telling of all, his large eyes held something Elena had never seen in a Zephyrian before: humility. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his voice translator crackling with static. "Thank you for coming. I know we do not deserve your help." Behind Elena stood Dr. Sarah Chen, now wearing the title of Special Advisor on Invasive Species. She carried a new case, larger than the one that had held the original seeds. This one contained something far more precious: hope. "Prime Cultivator," Elena replied carefully, "we received your distress call. The situation on Nexus Prime is..." She paused, searching for diplomatic words to describe the complete ecological collapse of an entire world. "Catastrophic," Thexmar finished for her. "The word you are looking for is catastrophic. Our homeworld is gone, Ambassador." Consumed by the gift you gave us, Dr. Chen stepped forward. "We tried to warn you about the kudzu's aggressive nature. We specifically mentioned that it needed to be controlled." "You did," Thexmar admitted. "We chose not to listen. We believed our technology was superior to your chaotic natural systems. Through the conference room's viewport, Elena could see Nexus Prime in the distance. The planet looked like a green marble shot through with veins of lighter color. From space, it almost looked beautiful. But she had seen the detailed scans. She knew that every one of those green areas had once been a city, a garden, a work of art that had taken the Zephyrians centuries to perfect. Our preliminary analysis suggests the kudzu has evolved far beyond its Earth origins, Dr. Chen said, consulting her notes. It's incorporated genetic material from dozens of local species. We're essentially dealing with a hybrid organism that has all the aggressive traits of Earth plants combined with the efficient genetics of your engineered species. Can you stop it? Thexmar asked. The question came out like a plea. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Stop it? No, but we might be able to control it. She opened her new case, revealing rows of containers filled with seeds, cuttings, and small vials of various substances. The kudzu isn't unstoppable. On Earth, it's controlled by natural predators, competing plants, diseases, and environmental factors. Your world doesn't have any of those things because you eliminated all biological competition. Thexmar stared at the case. You want to introduce more Earth species to our world? Not just Earth species, Dr. Chen explained. We want to recreate an ecosystem. The kudzu is dominating your planet because it has no natural enemies. In a balanced ecosystem, every organism is kept in check by others. A younger Zephyrian scientist who had been silent until now spoke up, but that would mean accepting chaos, allowing uncontrolled growth and competition. Our entire civilization is built on biological perfection and order. Dr. Chen nodded. That's exactly what it means. You'll have to give up control. Elena watched the Zephyrians process this idea. For a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting their environment, the concept of deliberately introducing chaos was almost incomprehensible. What would this ecosystem look like? Thexmar asked finally. Dr. Chen activated a holographic display. We've been working on this since we received your distress call. The plan involves introducing 73 different Earth species in carefully planned stages. Kudzu beetles to eat the vines directly, fungal diseases that attack kudzu roots, competing vine species that can match its growth rate, ground cover plants that can establish themselves faster than kudzu seedlings. The hologram showed Nexus Prime slowly changing over time. The solid green of kudzu coverage was broken up by patches of different colors and textures. Cities began to emerge from the vegetation, but they looked different. Wilder, more organic, more alive. It won't look like your old world, Elena said gently. It will be messier, more unpredictable. Some plants will succeed, others will fail. There will be competition and conflict between species. But it will be balanced, Dr. Chen added. Stable and, most importantly, resilient. When new challenges arise, the ecosystem will adapt naturally instead of requiring constant management. Thexmar was studying the projections with intense focus. How long would this process take? 15 to 20 years for full establishment, Dr. Chen replied. But you should see significant results within 2 to 3 years. The kudzu won't disappear, but it will become just another part of the ecosystem instead of dominating everything. And our people, the survivors in the underground cities, they'll be able to return to the surface gradually. But they'll need to learn new ways of living. Your cities will need to be redesigned to work with natural systems instead of controlling them. Elena leaned forward. Prime Cultivator, I need to ask you something directly. When we gave you those seeds, did you really believe we were just offering a gift? Thexmar was quiet for a long time. At first, yes. But as the crisis developed, some of my advisors suggested that it might have been deliberate. A weapon disguised as a gift. And what do you believe now? Now? I believe you gave us exactly what you said you were giving us. Seeds from your world. With appropriate warnings about their nature. We chose to ignore those warnings because we believed we knew better. He paused. The question is, will you help us fix our mistake? Dr. Chen closed her case. We've already prepared the first wave of species for introduction. But there's a condition. Name it. This solution requires trust. You'll need to let Earth organisms loose on your world without fully understanding how they'll behave. You'll need to accept that some experiments will fail, some species will thrive in unexpected ways, and some areas will develop in directions you never planned. You're asking us to abandon everything our civilization stands for. No, Elena said firmly. We're asking you to expand it. Your people are brilliant at biological engineering, but Earth species have something your engineered plants never developed. 4 billion years of experience surviving in an unpredictable universe. She gestured toward the viewport and the green world beyond. The kudzu didn't destroy your civilization because it was evil, or because we sent it to hurt you. It succeeded because it was tested by millions of years of competition, and you created a world without any competition at all. Dr. Chen reopened her case and held up a small vial of seeds. These are from plants that have learned to coexist with kudzu on Earth. They're not perfect. They're not as efficient as your engineered species, but they're survivors. Dexmar reached out and took the vial. Inside, Elena could see dozens of tiny seeds of different shapes and colors. They looked insignificant, almost worthless, but she knew that each one carried the genetic wisdom of eons of survival. If we do this, Dexmar said slowly, if we accept your help and introduce these chaotic systems to our world, what happens to the Zephyrian Empire? What happens to our way of life? Elena smiled for the first time since entering the room. It evolves. 3 months later, the first Earth species were introduced to Nexus Prime. Dr. Chen led a joint human-Zephyrian team that carefully established small populations in selected areas. The work was slow and often frustrating. Some species failed to establish themselves. Others thrived beyond expectations. But gradually, the unstoppable green tide of kudzu began to show patches of other colors. Red flowers from competing vines. Brown patches where fungal diseases took hold. Yellow areas where new ground cover plants established themselves. The Zephyrians learned to see beauty in chaos. Their new cities were designed as partnerships between engineered structures and wild growth. Their gardens became ecosystems where hundreds of species interacted in complex, unpredictable ways. Most importantly, they learned that strength didn't come from control, but from resilience. From the ability to adapt and survive when the unexpected happened. And across the galaxy, other civilizations took notice. The great Zephyrian Empire, once the symbol of perfect biological control, had been humbled by a single plant from a primitive world. But they had also been saved by the wisdom of that same primitive world. Trade delegations began arriving at Earth, not to offer humanity their advanced technology, but to learn about the chaotic systems that had produced such incredibly hardy organisms. Earth became the center of a new kind of galactic civilization, one based not on perfection, but on the strength that came from surviving in an imperfect universe. And in the Botanical Museum on Nexus Prime, now overgrown with dozens of Earth species, a small plaque was placed near where the original kudzu had been planted. It read simply, "In memory of the dangers of perfection and in honor of the wisdom of chaos."